Hey art nerds, today I'm going to do a really basic tutorial on blending really inexpensive alcohol-based markers, so permanent markers, art markers, blending really inexpensive art markers or alcohol markers. Today we're actually using the Jot Permanent markers. I bought these from Dollar Tree. You get a pack of 8. They're available in 2 color sets. I bought both color sets and I don't mind them. I don't hate them. I don't dislike them. They're pretty all right. And I thought this could be a really great opportunity to kind of explore some blending basics with a really basic material. Now, these could be a great pick for you if you just want to kind of practice some of your alcohol marker techniques. I have a full review of these markers that you guys can check out, and I am planning a field test, but I wanted to demonstrate some basic techniques for you guys so that you can go into that prepared. If you're looking for something a little bit more serious, maybe something using like Copic markers or Blick Studio Brush Markers or Prismacolor markers, I have other alcohol marker tutorials here on the channel, and you guys might want to check those out as well. But this is just something really basic. So the materials you're going to need to participate in this tutorial to follow along are the markers of your choice. Today we are using bullet nibbed markers, and these have a larger kind of soft bullet nib just because they're kind of cheap. We're also going to use a blending marker. Now, you can use any blending marker you want. You can use a Prismacolor one, you can use a Copic one, you can use a Blick Studio Brush Marker one, but you want a blending marker. We're using the Artist Loft blending marker today just because it's what I have handy and that was what was accessible to me. A blending marker is an alcohol marker that basically just contains alcohol solvent. Technically, if you really wish, you can use rubbing alcohol with this, but it's going to be a little bit harder to control. You're also going to want to use, of course, paper. Now, we're using an uncoated, fairly inexpensive paper today. We're actually going to use, let me move my markers out of the way so you guys can see. We are using the Payson Real Images sketch pad. So I think the total I have spent on materials for today's review is, at least at this point, let's see, this was the most expensive thing. This was $4. I think $4 is overpriced for these. Please only buy them on sale. Don't pay full price for the Artist Loft markers. But $4 plus $1 plus $2 because I'd bought 2 packs of the markers. So that's like $7 so far. So the materials we need for this particular tutorial are very accessible, very affordable. If you have a Michaels, if you have a Dollar Tree, you can do this tutorial. So the first thing I kind of want to explain to you guys is how alcohol markers work. Alcohol markers work a little bit differently than water-based markers. Water-based markers like Crayola or even watercolor markers, when you blend water-based markers, you are using water or a glycerin and water solvent to kind of move the pigment across the paper. When you're using alcohol markers, however, you are using an alcohol solvent. It could be rubbing alcohol, it can be your blender pen, to actually push the color to the back of the paper. So I'm going to give you guys a really quick demonstration with this marker here. So this is our permanent marker on the paper, and I'm just going to apply some of our alcohol blender on top of it. And you can see it does pick up some of the color. It will stain your nib. That's not going to transfer necessarily to other colors, but if you're worried about that, you can just kind of scratch it off, rub it off, mix it off on the side of the page. But as you apply your blender solution or other colors to your original color, it's going to push that color to the back of the page. I'm going to show you guys by just flipping this page over so you guys can see that it actually pushed it to the back of the page and onto the next page as well. Which is why, with alcohol marker tutorials, many of us will recommend that you use a blotter sheet of paper underneath to protect your other pages. So the same principle holds true whether you are using a blender marker like this or if you're using a lighter color. So we're going to apply the blue, and then we're going to blend it out with yellow, and we start by going into the darker color and applying the lighter color. So what that's doing is the alcohol solvent in this marker is actually pushing this color to the back of the paper. And if you wanted to blend it out more, you might go back into the same area and continue applying color. It's going to add, especially if you wait for this color to dry, it's actually going to add color on top of it. It's going to make it a little bit darker, and it's going to continue to push this blue back. Now, for something as striking, something as what's the word I'm looking for? Not diverse, but like there's a huge color gamut. There's a lot of difference between blue and yellow. So if you really wanted to do kind of a smoother blend, you might introduce some intermediate colors to help you blend. So let's go ahead and do that now. But you guys are noticing I'm really not using the blender marker for that. Now, if we were to go from blue to yellow and you really wanted to smooth out the transition, maybe you could use the blender marker. So we have blue, we have our green, and you note that for this instance, I'm doing my dark color and then I'm blending out with my lighter color. But usually when I'm blending markers, I start with light and I work my way darker. So we're gonna get to that in a couple minutes. And I try to work while the alcohol is still wet on the paper, before the alcohol has had a chance to evaporate, because that is your best chance of getting a really nice smooth blend. I'm also blending my colors darker, or I'm layering my colors so they're getting darker. That is why in my other alcohol marker tutorial videos, I usually recommend that you guys start kind of lighter than you think you're gonna need, because you can always work darker. As you apply more layers, it's going to get darker. So that's just something that as you get used to using alcohol markers, you're gonna get used to doing that. Now, usually when I'm doing alcohol marker stuff, I recommend people go for brush markers. And one of the reasons I recommend brush markers is because brush markers can really saturate the paper. They can put a lot of ink on the paper, which is going to make blending easy. Bullet nibs are typically a little bit dry, a little bit scratchy. They don't put as much ink down on the paper. They can be good for filling smaller areas, but if you want really smooth blends, a brush is usually going to be your best bet. So, going from blue to yellow here, we have 3 intermediate colors that kind of help the transition, but it's still not really a perfect blend. Now, something else we could do, something we can try, and I always encourage you guys to experiment and to try new things. That's how you learn what you like, is to take the yellow and try blending over our existing colors just to kind of smooth out that transition and to add some additional yellow to it. So we're blending from our darkest color to our lightest color in this example. So we talked about the blending marker, right? Let's talk about the blending marker a little bit more. Let's put down our blue. And our blue is so dark. We don't want it to be this dark. That's a big transition to go from blue to yellow, right? So what if we use the blending marker to push some of this color to the back of the paper? So it's not as dark. And maybe we're blending a little bit of this blue out. So there's already some blue introduced onto the paper. We're also adding our solvent. So the color we put down is going to be less streaky, more likely to kind of intermingle and blend if we're doing it wet and wet. And then we're gonna apply our yellow on top of it. Maybe we'll do another layer of yellow. And then maybe we'll do a little bit more blue. So that's still not as clean as a transition as this one was, but it's a little bit cleaner than this one up here. But that's with us working with a really, like these are, blue and orange would be complementary colors. These are split complementary colors. They're almost on opposite sides of the color wheel. There is a lot of difference between blue and yellow. It's a big transition. What if we did it the other way? What if we started with yellow and we wanted to go blue? So we'll do it this way first, right? Yellow to blue directly. Okay, all right, it's not much different than our blue to yellow. Maybe we add another layer of yellow here, blending into the blue. Maybe we'll blend a little bit further so we have like a larger area of green, but that's still really dark. That's still a pretty wide difference, a pretty wide gap between our yellow and our blue. Not as wide, but still pretty wide. Okay, what if we blended from yellow to blue using our 3 intermediate colors? So we're gonna start with our yellow. We're gonna do light green, teal, actually, let's leave it. Light green, teal, dark green, blue. And this one has a little bit of dirty on it, so let's clean that off. So we start with our yellow, and I'll tell you guys, I usually start from light to dark because it's always easier to work darker than it is to try and lighten a dark color. Even the colorless blender, which is really just used to push color to the back of the paper, it's not really used to lighten the color, to blend the colors so much. Even the colorless blender can only go so far. So I end up applying like 3 layers of a color, and that will kind of get us our most saturated, our darkest color. So we have our yellow, now we did our light green, let's do our teal. Our teal is actually pretty dark. And then we're gonna blend that back out, going in this neutral zone here, kind of blending back out with the green, and then blending the green on top of the yellow. And then we might decide we want to go back with our yellow and try to blend that. And it's really best to try to work wet into wet, to apply color while color is still wet, because that's when you're going to have the easiest time blending. And in this example, I'm actually leaving areas of the base color, but in a moment I will show you guys on a circle that I don't usually leave a lot of just the base colors, the blending intermediary colors. And we did dark green. Now we have our dark blue. And then we're gonna blend that back out with our dark green. And if we're still really not happy with our transition, we may go all the way through. So we may do, okay, let's do our teal. We're gonna start in our blue and blend on top of our existing color. So that's gonna put a little bit of a teal cast on top of everything. Then we may take our light green and blend that on top of everything. So you see how everything's getting really, really dark? These are just blending methods if we're trying to get from one really dark color to one really light color. And then we might take our yellow, and let's start it in this green here, and blend on top of it. Now I'm really saturating this paper, and this is not a paper that's designed to take markers, so I'm getting some buckling. I've really kind of overworked this to show you guys. So let's blend it back so you can see a lot of it is soaked through and a lot of it is soaked through onto the next page. But that's a couple of techniques for blending. So we're gonna do a couple of circles now. We're gonna do one where we start with our blue and then we work to our yellow, and then we're gonna do one where we start with our yellow and work to our blue. So for this example, I'm actually going to introduce a technique from kind of another method I like to use. So we're going to use a colored lead to sketch in our circles. So we're going to use blue for the sketch for our beginning with blue circle. And then we're going to use yellow for our sketch beginning with our yellow circle. So we are starting with blue. That means we're starting with our darkest color. So that means I want to think first about where the shadow is going to hit, and then I'm going to work my way out from there. So let's say the light source is coming from the top left. So we have our dark blue. Now we're going to blend out, starting inside that dark blue, and blending out using our green. I'm going to try to keep the proportions for everything the same, and we're going to compare the two end results. Now I'm not saying one method is better than the other method. I'm saying one method is how I typically work, and the other method is a method how other artists might typically work. So there is no right or wrong method necessarily, just what works for you and what works for other people. And normally, if I was coloring off camera, I would be moving this paper all over the place, trying to get the best angle for my wrist, but my lighting is a little bit weird, and my camera is a lot a bit weird. So we're just gonna work with what we've got for now. And these are not alcohol markers. They are not the blendiest of markers. They're all right. They're Dollar Tree, you know, they're okay. But if we were doing this with like Prismacolor or Copic markers, then you might see a bit smoother of a transition. But this is also good because it kind of allows you guys to see how I'm working and how I'm thinking about the color and how I'm thinking about blending. All right, so that is our basic sort of fill for this. Now I want to start working on getting my colors better blended. So maybe I will go over the whole thing with yellow. Why don't we try doing it that way? So this kind of applies a yellow cast to everything, kind of unifying our colors a little bit better. So it no longer looks so much like a ball with multiple stripes. Now it kind of starts to look like a yellow ball that has some light and shadow on it. I'll do another layer. So we're darkening up our yellow, and we're also pushing our other colors further into the background. Okay, so now we've got what looks like a green ball with a yellow light source. Totally fine with that. That doesn't bother me. Now we're going to take our light green color maybe apply a layer of light green, kind of building those colors up and trying to soften some of those transitions. So what it's doing is it's not only building up color, adding more color, but it's also blending the colors that we already have. Now I'm going to take our teal blue, and what I will often do is I'll work it back and forth between several colors until I get the blend and the look that I want. And you guys can check out more information about how I use alcohol markers kind of in a more illustration setting in some of my other alcohol marker videos, which I will link throughout this video. Okay, so now we have, it looks like we've built up a lot more shine. We've got more shadow. There's a fairly harsh transition. That could be harsh lighting. We can lighten it up by adding a bit of the middle green, and that's going to kind of smooth some of those edges. Then we can go in with our darker green. But you see how we went from what could have maybe been a yellow ball to it's very much a green ball now. Okay, so we've got our darker green. And then finally, we're gonna do our dark blue, just kind of down here at the bottom. All right, so that is our ball going from blue to yellow and then back again. Now we're gonna do our ball going from yellow to blue. So if I'm going to go from yellow to blue, the first thing I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do a fill. I'm going to fill the whole ball in with yellow. And there's a few different techniques. You can do that if you want kind of a streak-free finish. But I'm just going to lazily and quickly kind of color it in for you guys. And really, if you want no streaks, you're going to do little bitty circles like this, controlled little bitty circles. So I do want you guys to be aware of one of the better methods. And if you have a brush on your marker, then you can really use it more like you would a watercolor brush, where you use how you handle the marker and the strokes you make to define your forms. And I can talk about that in future videos, and I have mentioned that in a few future videos. So, okay, so we have our all over yellow, right? We started with yellow, we're working our way over to blue. So I might do another layer of yellow, but for now, I'm going to move on to our green. This time I'm going to leave maybe a little bit of rim lighting along the bottom. I'm going to fill in this area with green. And I defined the form first in this instance before I started coloring, just so I kind of had a roadmap. I kind of knew where I was going. So maybe I'll do another layer of the green, focusing on applying more green to the center of the ball. And then I might go back with the yellow and blend the exterior green, the lighter green, out a bit. And that's going to add another layer of depth to our yellow. So blending isn't necessarily so much about mixing the two colors, like if you were blending watercolors wet into wet. It's more about creating an optical blend. Your eyes naturally blend the colors because they've been layered one on top of the other. So maybe then I would do another layer of this green here in the middle. Maybe I would make the transition a little bit stronger down here at the bottom. Okay, so that's lots of green and lots of yellow. Let's move on now to the teal. Would add the teal here in the center. And I put so much alcohol on the page, and the page is still so wet that it's actually starting to tear up the paper surface. So you want to be really careful about that, and you probably want to use a thicker, nicer paper than what I'm using for today's purposes. Okay. Then I would use my green, my light green, to kind of blend that teal back out. Maybe I would decide to extend the rim lighting a little bit so it's green instead of yellow. Then I would use the darker green. And we'll start here in the center. So I find that working from light to dark kind of allows me to gauge my colors and my color placement a little bit better. But you can see the paper is starting to wrinkle. That's because the paper's too wet. I've applied too much liquid at one time. That's where you can really start damaging your paper. And that's one of the reasons why alcohol markers and watercolor markers in your sketchbook is not necessarily the best choice. You want to leave it plenty of time to dry. So I'm going to add a little bit of the blue in the center. And then what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to let it dry because the paper is getting really fragile. So I'll use my blender marker up here and maybe just try to lighten my yellow up here just a bit and let this dry. Okay, so the alcohol has had a chance to evaporate. I can definitely feel some surface abrasion where the nibs have kind of torn up the paper surface. So I'm going to go in with a little bit more dark blue. And then I'm going to blend that out with the green a bit. All right, so this kind of looks like maybe a predominantly yellow ball with some green highlights. I'm going to let that evaporate again, and then I'm going to go over it with the, at least with the yellow, but probably the yellow and the lighter green. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go over, not all of it, but most of it with this yellow. And I want to let you guys know that the way I'm thinking about this, the way I'm talking about this, I will denote, and I have denoted when it would be different with an alcohol marker, but for the most part, the principles are the same. So if you're decent at using alcohol markers, and then you're probably going to be decent at getting cheap permanent markers to obey your whims. And these honestly blend a little bit better than some of the cheap alcohol markers I've used in the past. They definitely a little bit easier to use than the fine color. And one of the big problems is just going to be your color gamut. What colors are available to you? What colors are being manufactured? And if you're using permanent markers as alcohol markers, then you're going to have a smaller color range. I think one of the largest color ranges available in permanent markers is like 36 colors. So you're not going to have a lot of skin tones, that sort of thing. Next, I'm going to use our light green. Kind of do the same thing. I also, just as a general rule, I don't recommend using permanent markers as alcohol markers. Most of them have pretty strong fumes and they are 100% not designed to be archival. They're designed to mark, but they're not designed to like not yellow the paper or last 100 years or whatever. That said, alcohol markers aren't really either. A lot of them have very fugitive dyes that if displayed in direct sunlight, they're gonna fade over time. Okay, now we're gonna take the teal and maybe go over some of these areas. So even though you guys will see me do permanent marker challenges every now and then, it's not something I think you guys should necessarily emulate unless you're looking to do a challenge. And if you're buying markers for kids, or if you're a kid and you would like alcohol markers, you can hit me up. I do have recommendations that I think are kind of a great place to start and will also last you a few years, because those of you who watch my other videos know I'm not really big on buying stuff you're just gonna throw away. So when I recommend products that I know will last you as an artist, that you will enjoy for at least 5 years. All right, so I think we are about finished with our 2 versions of blending. So on the left, we have blue to dark green to this sort of darker teal to green to yellow. Then on the right, we have yellow to light green to teal to green to blue. And these are going to be some of the most difficult spreads, most difficult color gradations you're gonna come across. It might only get more difficult if you were to go from blue to orange. That one might be a little bit more tricky because then you're going past yellow all the way to orange. So let's try this another way. So we did yellow to blue. Let's do orange to purple. So I just kind of grabbed a handful of markers, but I think we can get away with a smaller color spread than necessarily what I grabbed, because we're going from orange to purple. There's a few different ways to do that, and it kind of depends on what colors you're going to have available. So these are the colors that I grabbed. They come from 2 different sets of Jot Permanent markers. So I had a 16 color array to choose from, and these are 6 of the colors from that 16 color spread. We definitely want our orange. We may even grab the yellow for like an orange highlight. So that's kind of an optional bonus. You don't have to do that. Then we have, actually, I think I want to skip the red, because I think we can go into pink. Then I might keep this red here, this sort of fuchsia purple, and then our darker purple. Honestly, we could probably even skip this one right here and go fuchsia, or I'm sorry, hot pink to fuchsia, and then fuchsia to purple. So why don't we go ahead and get rid of this red here, and we're gonna try doing it in 4 colors, and I'll put the yellow over to the side. So you guys are seeing me swatch colors, blend colors, and test colors before I commit to anything. That's just general good practice with alcohol markers. You cannot trust the color of the body of the marker. That's not always indicative of what the color is going to look like. And sometimes colors mix together and form a new color. Like this orange and this hot pink actually make for a really nice sort of scarlet red, a color that wasn't available to us before. So swatching and kind of pre-testing your colors before you've committed to your final art piece is a really good way to not only familiarize yourself with your markers, but to guarantee some success. This is particularly important if you're working with really cheap markers. You want you're already working with kind of a hurdle. So you want to give yourself the best chance at success possible. And then we're just kind of blending out. So that was orange to purple. Let's go from purple to orange. So we're gonna start with our purple. And one of the reasons I demonstrate shading and blending techniques with spheres is spheres are pretty difficult. You've got a smooth transition that you need to think about. If we were to do a cube, and I can do a cube next, but a cube is actually pretty simple compared to a sphere. If we were to do a cube, you have planes on the cube, and those don't have to have a gradient. Those don't have to have a blended transition. Okay, so that is from purple to orange. Okay, so I promised you guys a cube. Let's do a cube. I'm actually gonna grab the orange pencil for this. And I use colored leads when I do my quote unquote lineless alcohol marker and lineless watercolor techniques. So it's kind of like a preview of another video. All right, so we have our cube. We wanna think about where is our light source. So let's pretend our light source is overhead. And we want to go from orange to purple. It's actually pretty simple. So we start by filling in our lightest color. And you may even decide, oh, hey, I want to use that yellow we talked about. And I'm going to blend back that orange just a little bit so that it looks more like the light's hitting it. Now, if you want a sharp transition, then you would allow this to dry and then apply your next layer. So now we got to think about how the light's hitting. All right, I would think the light is going to be darkest here because this is almost like it's in shadow. So let's do our next darkest color, which would be our hot pink. And if you want to get fancy, you could just do orange, pink, and purple, and you would have a decent cube. But let's pretend like we're fancy here. We're fancy up in this joint, and we're gonna do a little bit of gradation. So we're going to go in with a little bit of kind of that fuchsia purple. We're gonna do it at the bottom where it would be receiving some of the least amount of light. Then we would use our pink, and we'd kind of blend it out, kind of adding another layer to our pink. So we're kind of creating a bit of a gradation here. So then we need to do our darkest side. So let's start with our fuchsia, and we're gonna go fuchsia first, and then we're gonna do purple at the bottom. And a lot of the techniques that we use for alcohol markers can be applied with a bit of adjustment to watercolor because they're both transparent mediums. And then we're applying our purple kind of down at the bottom as well as along the edge. And we'll blend that out with our fuchsia. Now you might decide you want to go back in with your orange just kind of along some of the edges further away from the light source. Just kind of tighten them up. But basically, what we're doing is this. And very roughly, without talking about special colored lights or filters to influence light, when you're going from light to dark, you're generally going from warm colors to cool colors. So you're going from yellow to blue, or like orange to blue. And we don't really use black all that often. Okay, so we did a cube. Let's not forget that we talked about doing spheres. Why? Because they're some of the most difficult forms to think about when we're thinking about lighting and shadow and the application of such. Now, I feel like I'd like to use that sort of dark cherry red as an intermediary color between our hot pink and our fuchsia color. I'm also adding in the yellow in case I decide to do light. And I'm gonna do this just kind of the normal way I do any sort of color application. So if I'm coloring objects that are orange, I do usually start with a yellow, a warmer yellow. And I'm gonna apply my yellow where the light's hitting. I think I've actually used this thing dry. That's a shame because I still have a field test I have to do. Yikes. Okay, then while the yellow is still kind of wet, I'm gonna go ahead and add in my orange. Now we're doing an orange ball, but it's going to purple as it moves away from our light source. And we're gonna keep our light source in the upper left-hand corner like we did with the cube. And doing basic three-dimensional shapes, you know, cones, cylinders, pyramids, cubes, and spheres is a really good way to kind of practice understanding lighting and how lighting affects your forms. It's also pretty easy to set up for still lives because you can grab a ball, you can grab a can of soda, you can grab, I'm not thinking of anything that's a cone right now. Oh, like a funnel. You can grab, what would be pyramidal? That's like a normal household object. I don't know. You guys are gonna have to help me out here in the comments below. I'm sure there's something. Okay, so we have our orange base. Let's blend out, or try to blend out, our yellow to orange transition. If you find your markers are starting to run dry and you don't have a replacement and they're not refillable, stand them so that the brush or the bullet nib or whatever, the writing end, or the writing end you want to use in the case of double-ended markers, stand it so that is facing downward so the ink will flow towards that. Then I'm going to do another layer of orange. So you guys might note that I really saturate the page with color because partially I don't want too much streaking and I'm coloring really fast and really lazy, so I'm not necessarily saturating the paper on the first go round. Gotta be fast though if you're gonna narrate as you do the demonstration for YouTube. Okay, so we have our it's kind of like three colors because we have our yellow, our blended out orange, our orange. Now we wanna do our magenta color. And I kind of sketched that ball in just to kind of remind me to start thinking about that. So a lot of markers is apply color, blend out, apply color, blend out. So there's a lot of working back and forth. And I think people who kind of struggle to get markers to blend, it's because they're not working back and forth between the colors as much as they should be. And it's definitely one of those things that the more you practice, the more you're going to get a feel for it, the better you're going to get, the more satisfied you're going to be with your results. And if you live in the Nashville area, you're in luck because I teach marker classes, specifically Copic marker classes, through the Nashville Plaza. And you guys can come take classes with me in person, get to use real alcohol markers, and have a good time. So that's great if you're interested in learning more about alcohol markers and you're not sure if you want to pay all that money for them yet. Okay, so we're going to do another layer with the hot pink. Then we're going to go in with that kind of darker red, that kind of cherry darker red we were talking about. So we're introducing a new transition color. And you might want to give this a chance to dry. I usually like to work wet and wet because it does give me the best blends, but I'm finding that these markers are kind of tearing up my cheap paper. So I'm doing kind of the heart, the heart of the shadow. I'm having a hard time explaining what my brain is thinking and making it something you guys can also kind of understand. Because, you know, as artists, we start thinking about things as like I don't know, inexplicable descriptions for what things are, okay? So it looks like kind of a hurricane on like a storm map. And then I'm going to blend that out. I'm going to do it kind of gently because my paper is getting kind of tired. Blend that out gently with our hot paint. So right now we're doing a really good job of, we're kind of maintaining that this is an orange ball we're dealing with. So we're staying hot, but it's hot getting cooler. Okay, so then I'm going to use kind of the fuchsia color here in the center, the eye of the storm. And we're also working smaller as we go. So your highlights and your shadows should kind of take up the least amount of space on your page or on your illustration, with your midtones kind of taking up the most amount of space. And then we're gonna do the little center of the eye, the calm inside the storm. And we're gonna blend that out a little bit with our fuchsia. All right, I'm gonna let this dry, give the paper a chance to recover, and then I'm gonna apply kind of orange and fuchsia all over it just to kind of help blend out those colors. I am, however, gonna use my blender marker here in the yellow and maybe even in the orange a little bit, just to try and knock a bit more highlight in. Now, if you're finding that you can't get enough of a highlight, you can always introduce like a white color pencil or white gouache to your illustration just to kind of add those highlights back in. And I promise that's gonna make a really big difference. Okay, so our markers have had a chance to dry. Next, we're gonna go over it with a layer of orange, but already it's very orange influenced. The gamut between orange and purple doesn't seem as insurmountable as the gamut between yellow and blue. Okay, so this has had ample time to dry. I'm gonna go over it one more time with another layer of orange. So one of the best ways for me to teach you guys about blending and just kind of marker basics and how to utilize cheap markers like this is really just to walk you guys through something step by step. So I want you guys to check out my, I have a Sharpie blending tutorial, a Sharpie challenge I should say. I'm gonna link that in the description below. I'm also gonna link it in the cards. I also have several alcohol marker tutorial videos that I'm going to link in the description and in the cards as well. And I promise when I get back, when I have time to actually record a tutorial for you guys, I'm going to do a tutorial where I show you guys kind of the basics of blending with higher quality alcohol markers, because there are some differences. It is a little bit more challenging using something really cheap like these markers here. These are not designed to be art markers. My yellow is already starting to die. I've used it to death, and we've used it a bit, but we haven't really used it that much. There's definitely differences between how you would blend and how you would use these sort of markers and how you might use Copics or how you might use Prismacolors or something that's designed to be an art marker. So I do have a field test challenge coming up where I'm going to kind of use my favorite of the Dollar Tree art supplies to make an actual piece of art. It might turn out great, it might turn out terrible, but I'm definitely going to be using these alcohol markers as part of that video. So I definitely want you guys to keep an eye out for that. So I switched papers on you guys because I'm tricksy like that, but before we go, I'm going to do just kind of a really basic demonstration. I'm going to use Kara as my inspiration, and we're going to be using some of the Artist Loft alcohol markers along with these really cheap Jot Permanent markers. And the reason we're also using some of the Artist Loft markers is we don't have any skin tones. They're permanent markers, so they came in like kind of bright, fun, colorful colors, but having just a couple of skin tones handy really makes doing these kind of challenges easy. So of course I'm kind of leaning heavily on, maybe I won't do Kara, maybe I'll do somebody else. I'm kind of leaning heavily on skin right now, so I'm going to add a few elements to kind of make it less of just like, we're going to use a lot of the Artist Loft skin tones because that's what we have. And something that's a little bit more like, we're using skin tones and we're using the Jot Permanent markers. Now, again, this isn't the field test. This is just kind of to show you guys some things about blending. Just kind of quickly demonstrate things. So I'm doing kind of my underdrawing sketch with a pink INC or ink, pink ink color point. I really like these. I think I mentioned that like 4 times in this video, so I apologize for being repetitive. But they're great. You guys should check out the review for that. And I'm just going to kind of draw a bunch of beads as an excuse to bring more colors into this piece, because right now there's not necessarily a lot of color going on. Okay, so we have our base drawing here. I'm going to start with one of the Artist Loft colors. This is Pearl. It's kind of a warmer pink. In this instance, you can barely tell there's anything on the paper at all, which is kind of a shame. Having these sort of lighter colors handy is really great for blending, because you often don't want to use the colorless blender as your blending color. You want to use kind of a lighter version of the colors that you're using as a blending color. In fact, Copic now sells blending sets, which are just kind of their lightest colors. So if we want this to sort of develop, then we need to let it dry and apply another layer later. So I'm going to go in with the Artist Loft Honeydew color, which is kind of a light green blue. So even if you were to buy really cheap markers to use as like your alcohol or your art markers, having a few lighter colors and brush markers can be really useful for kind of getting the most out of your collection. Because the whole point when you're working with a limited palette is you want it to kind of look like you're intentionally working with a limited palette. You want it not to look like you just don't have any colors. You want it to look like that's your art style and you're selectively using fewer colors because you're going for a specific look. So I'm just gonna kind of gently blend that out and use this as kind of my next layer. That's what makes the 3-color challenges kind of make or break, is it's how well does that artist use very limited colors to kind of get their message across. And that's why I think personally it's more challenging if you're working from an existing piece and then you randomly pull colors. But what I prefer to see is I like seeing artists problem solve. So I like seeing them pick the colors and then design a piece around the colors. And I know that's not really what everyone who's watching those challenges is looking for, but that's what I'm looking for as a fellow artist. So this is really cute right now. It's gonna be a shame for us to ruin it. If we were to give her kind of a natural hair color, we're kind of limited. We can do brown, we can do a blonde, we can maybe do a red hair. It's going to look not as good because we just don't have enough colors to kind of build up color depth. Let's aim for, let's try to make her a redhead, I guess. So we're gonna start with her eyes, and I'm gonna use the yellow as a base, and I'm gonna have to work a little more carefully because this doesn't have a brush tip. It's harder to get kind of nuanced color. So you guys are gonna see me thinking more about where I place color and how I actually handle the nib. Then we're gonna go in with kind of the light green. So I'm kind of dancing the marker across the paper surface. Now, if you're working with these sort of cheaper markers that have kind of a fixed size, draw bigger than you would normally draw, because it's going to be harder for you to kind of get into tight areas. And I switched papers on y'all. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's worth mentioning. I switched over to the drawing pad rather than the sketching pad because I got kind of tired of the paper in the sketching pad tearing as we worked on this. So that's just like a little FYI. Then I'm gonna do just a little bit of teal, and you guys see it kind of blobbed out on me. That's what I mean by you're gonna have to be careful. You may wanna work bigger than you would normally work, that sort of thing. Okay, so we are giving her red hair, we're rendering her with red hair. So I'm going to start with a yellow and work my way through. We may end up at brown, we may end up at the dark cherry red. It really kind of depends on how the colors look on the paper, but we are starting with this sort of yellow color. And I apologize for the cast shadow. I'm having to lean over what I do, and the sun is just not working in my favor today. But I'm kind of already leaving a highlight, and how much highlight you want to leave is going to be up to you. When you're working with limited colors like we are kind of today, you're going to want to leave a lot of highlights. You're going to want to let the paper do as much of your work for you as possible. And again, it's all about making it look intentional. Now, if you have a limited selection of colors, of alcohol marker colors or whatever, you can augment that, unless you're doing a challenge. You can augment that using colored pencils, using watercolors, using watercolor pencils. Basically, whatever you have more of, you can use that to kind of help you. And I'm using just kind of little short strokes to kind of fill the area in. So we're going to do the center of the beads, even though we're going to color on top of that. Now, my aim here isn't to make like a great character design. So I'm just trying to show you guys techniques, but these colors, these markers, they may not be a fit for you if you really are aiming to do something specific with them. I'm kind of working around what I have. So if I'm doing Dollar Tree reviews, you guys probably figured out that I'm in Luling. So I'm at my childhood home, and while I was upstairs, I found some of my really old Prismacolor markers. So I'm kind of thinking about doing something with those for you guys as well. So we have our yellow down. Let's try putting in our orange. This is like a really bright primary orange. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of doing a base sort of thing. I'm kind of only going to put it in the shadows. And I was going to try to blend it out with my dyeing and drying yellow. We'll see how well that works. And right now the coloring is pretty chunky. I'm working with a pretty chunky nib, and there's not really much flex or much give to it. If ever we're doing a challenge video, you know what my downfall is going to be. It's not going to be limited color selection. It's going to be, does it have a flexible brush nib? The answer is no. I'm more likely to struggle. Okay, so we kind of have our base for her blonde hair, or I'm sorry, her red hair down. I'm going to use the yellow again and just kind of blend out that orange. And when you're working with a limited palette of colors with a limited number of markers, you're going to want to get as much use out of each color as you can. And in some of my other marker videos, I talk about how you can get about 3 layers of color from every marker. This yellow is running dry, so it's probably not, yeah, it's running dry. Wow, that was fast. It's probably not the best marker to kind of show you guys that. So I'm going to show you guys with orange in a second. Wow, this isn't, I'm not even going to be able to use this for the field test. That's sad. Okay, so this is layer 1. I'm going to let that layer dry. We're going to go back into her hair. We're just going to kind of add another layer of orange to her hair. Again, we're building up tones and we're building up color. And you're focusing on the hair movement, hair direction, which is a little bit easier to do if you're using a brush than if you're using kind of a larger bullet nib like this. But we're making it work. I mean, that's all about what art supplies on a budget is making it work, figuring things out, problem solving. And those are good skills to have. Sometimes only having access to cheap art supplies, only having access to, you know, things that other people call bad art supplies, sometimes that makes you a stronger artist because it teaches you how to problem solve, how to think on your feet, and how to make a situation work for you. So that's 2 layers of orange. This has had a chance to dry. I'm gonna apply another layer of orange to that. Then we're gonna go in with the red. And for red hair, once you have kind of the orange base, depending on the person, depending on the character, and I do recommend working from reference if you're doing red hair because it's a lot of variety and a lot of types of red hair. But I would recommend going with a red, maybe not a fire engine red, but like a browner red, a maroon kind of color, or going brown. If you go too red, it's going to look like fire engine, which is fine. Some people do have fire engine, but not everybody has fire engine. It's not the only kind of red hair out there. And I feel like I do a lot of videos where we end up coloring red hair. And part of the reason for that is if I'm using a limited color palette like we have today, red, orange, and yellow are really common colors. So it's actually very easy to do a passable version of red hair. I was tempted to give her pink hair, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I may end up going with pink hair or purple hair when I do the field test. But I don't like relying too much on fantasy hair colors because I feel like there's a lot of people who want to do fantasy hair colors for their characters, but there's a lot of people who just want to like draw a version of the character that kind of looks like them, has their hair color, because they don't see that hair color represented too often. So I like to try and also do more natural hair colors. And you guys are probably noticing how I'm going from color to color, blending back and forth, adding extra layers. That's really my big secret for working with alcohol markers, is just being patient and working back and forth and developing colors until you get kind of what you're looking for. And alcohol markers, like watercolor, do dry a little bit lighter than they go down. So you may find that you need to go back into an area and add another layer of that color, like on her cheeks here, for example. I mean, we don't have to, but maybe we choose to. Or maybe over here, we want to add just a little bit more red to her hair. So it's really about like kind of assessing what you have and adding things as you go along. So be flexible, be willing to continue working. Don't expect the work to kind of finish too quickly. Like, expect that it's going to take a little while. Okay, so the orange is dried, and that's our 3rd layer of orange. So you can see we get about 3 versions of orange, 3 layers of orange from one marker. And I'm adding a little bit more orange back here. I want to be able to blend that out a bit with the yellow, but I don't think that's going to be feasible because it's yellow. Oh, I have another yellow because I bought 2 packs. That's a bit of a cheaty thing, but I'm going to save that for the field test because this yellow's dead, and that's not good, y'all. But it's alive enough to give me just a little bit of extra color, so I can kind of squeeze through there. So with this, I'm actually going to ink it when I'm done. Sometimes with the lineless watercolor style, I like to ink it with the markers that I'm using. I don't think that's going to work for this. So we want to do beads. Lots of beads. Beads, glorious beads, or something like that. So I thought I had my pink color point around. There it is. Ha. Okay, draw some beads up here. Extend the skin a little bit more back here, and we're gonna have to add a few layers to that. But we're gonna start with this kind of hot pink color. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of coloring the darkest part of the bead. And this is really prone to like expanding and bleeding out. So you're gonna wanna be aware of that. And then we're gonna use the colorless blender, and that's gonna make it expand and bleed out even more. So that's something to be aware of, but we're just gonna use this to kind of push this color back a little bit so we can kind of get a lighter version of that color. And we're gonna let that dry. And then for the beads here, we're gonna start with light green, and we kind of colored in a little bit. Actually, let's do a little bit of orange. And then we're gonna go in with our lighter green. And I'm leaving some white where the light would be hitting it. And I think I'm gonna do blue or purple, but probably blue in the back. And that way we'll have at least done a few of these colors. We haven't done any brown, so maybe I need to do some brown in her hair to kind of show you guys how that works. So I'm gonna use our colorless blender again and just kind of push that color back. Then we're gonna take our brown, and you guys notice I'm kind of skipping around. I never really finish working on one section. So you'll see the brown, when I apply it over red, it actually has kind of a red-brown color. And that's because with alcohol markers, the previous layers you've applied, they will influence the layers you put on top of them, which is why sometimes in some of my videos, you guys might see me do like a blue layer first to kind of tone the whole piece. And I'm kind of using brown as sort of the darkest shadows, and then I'm gonna blend that back out a bit with the red, which also adds kind of another layer of influence to it. So it's really about building up and developing those colors. So hopefully though, you guys are kind of seeing that alcohol markers, you don't need to use the nicest ones. I mean, these are from Dollar Tree. We're using markers from Dollar Tree, and our nice markers are the markers from Michael's. So like, we're not using the most expensive or the fanciest markers today. We're using really accessible markers and really accessible products. But we are doing a lot of blending, and we're being kind of patient. And we're also applying knowledge, and this is unfortunate for some of you guys because this is knowledge I already have. We're applying knowledge from past projects to this project. So now I'm going to use this kind of teal blue, and we'll do the hair bead in the back. And again, I'm going to use our blender marker and blend that a little bit. But that's why you guys watch tutorials, is you are using somebody else's knowledge, their experience, and you're using that to kind of leapfrog and learn from them and apply that to your own projects. So now we're going to take the purple. This is the fuchsia purple. We're applying it kind of to the center of the beads, like the darkest part of the beads, and you can leave it as if you like it, because it does look pretty good like that. But I'm going to blend it out just a little bit so we can practice demonstrating that technique. Then we're going to use our darker green. I'm going to do the center and kind of the bottom of the bead. And we're going to kind of blend that out using our lighter green. I mean, that's why I record tutorials too, is I want you guys to use my knowledge and to be able to put it to use and make it worthwhile, because I had the benefit of learning from other artists too. So this is me kind of paying it forward. Now I'm doing another layer with the teal, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of the teal in these green ones. And then I'm going to do, where is it? A little bit of purple in the center of these, and a little bit of dark blue here and along the edge there. Okay, now I want to do her eyebrows, and I'm gonna have to get all on top of this, so I apologize for that. A little bit of orange, and I'm just gonna be okay with it. Like whatever happens, I'm gonna be okay with it. And then maybe even, we would normally let this dry, but just a little bit of brown. Okay, so she looks pretty cute so far. Maybe go back in with our skin tone over here. Again, we're only gonna get like 3 layers with it, but we can switch over to our pink, which is just a little bit darker. Some people will use kind of a light pink like this as a skin tone. And then what's left with this is really just to ink it. And you can ink it with kind of any sort of inking thing you like to ink with. You can even ink it with a ballpoint pen if you want. You can go over it with color pencils if you want. You can go over it with watercolor if you want to. I'm going to ink it with this here. This is a brush pen. It's a Kuretake Fudego Kochi. I did not get it from Dollar Tree. I actually haven't gotten around to reviewing the pens I bought from Dollar Tree. So one of those might have worked really well for this, but since I don't have them reviewed, I'm just gonna go ahead and ink this with the Kuretake Fudego Kochi. Actually, I will blend out this red a little bit with this orange here. And let that dry, and then I'll ink it in time lapse with this, since it's not really from Dollar Tree and it's not really from this particular, what am I saying? It's for this tutorial, but it's not something I'm teaching you guys how to do. You guys can check out other videos where I will show you how to ink with brush pens. Okay, that wasn't my best inking job ever, but it was an inking job and now it's inked. You can also use a white gel pen or a white color pencil to add some additional details. This is going to make it really pop. You can use it to add reflections or shinies to her eyes, to her hair, and to the beads. right, art nerds, that was a pretty basic demonstration of blending for cheaper alcohol markers. I hope you guys found this demonstration helpful, useful, and informative. Hopefully it sheds a little bit of light on how you can use alcohol markers and how you can get the sort of effects and the sort of colors you want using alcohol markers. You don't have to use the most expensive markers on the market. These are Dollar Tree Jot markers. They're available $1 for 8. They do run out kind of quick, but you can use really cheap art markers or really cheap, even permanent markers to make alcohol marker art. I did augment this little piece with 4 Artist Loft alcohol markers. They're about $4 each, so I don't really recommend them. There are definitely better and cheaper alcohol markers on the market, and you guys can check out some of my other alcohol marker reviews to find the ones that are best for you. I also have a video coming up where I compare really cheaply made but sometimes overpriced alcohol markers like these Artist Loft markers to better made, sometimes cheaper markers like Copic, Blick Studio Brush Markers, and Prismacolor markers. So I hope you guys are looking forward to that, and make sure you keep an eye out. Anyway, if you like what I do and you want to see more of it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the bell notification so you don't miss an update. If you ever have any questions, if you ever want to see something demonstrated or drawn in depth, make sure you join me on Friday evenings at 8 p.m. Central for my Power Hour art streams. I do demonstrations, I do art supply demonstrations, I do drawing demonstrations, all sorts of cool things during Power Hours. So make sure you join me for that. This is part of my Dollar Tree review series, and I have a big field test coming up that I hope you guys are also looking forward to seeing. I will see you guys again in the near future, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye, guys!